Please welcome to the stage Eric Cantrell of Medialon, a part of the Seventh Sense Design family.
Storytelling is a key element in the SATE equation. It's the flavor in the recipe. Story connects people and places using plot, pacing, and purpose. Everyone here transforms stories to connect them with audiences in new and various ways. That transformation of the story from the page to a movie screen to an immersive world is impressive in so many artistic ways, but none of that stagecraft would matter if the story isn't engaging to the people to begin with. For us at Medialon, we're a control company, we're a technology company. The kinds of products that we make wouldn't have a reason to exist if it wasn't for compelling storytelling. So facilitating storytelling through technology is beyond our job, it's our purpose. And it's why we're proud to once again sponsor the storytelling segment at SATE. I'm really looking forward to this next section. It's about storytelling with, to audiences who have really deep connections to the subject matter and the stories. And I'd like to welcome Ian Klein back to the stage to kick it off.
Storytelling. We all like it, we all know it's important, and for the most part it comes pretty naturally to all of us. And in this room we're all storytellers. If not by title, then we certainly all play a part in telling those stories. So there's no shortage, certainly, of us talking about stories. You know, there's a new ride, cool story. New building, what's the story behind it? New technology, what's the story that got us here to this point? So I couldn't tell you a whole lot about storytelling that you probably haven't heard before, but I could tell you that we've been doing it since the dawn of humanity around a campfire, that storytelling is what makes us human, and that without it, society as we know it might simply cease to be. But I'm not going to, because, well, I'm not one of the people actually giving a presentation today. But Nathan, Shannon, and I did think a lot about what story we wanted to tell with this conference, and more importantly, who were the storytellers that were going to share in that narrative tapestry. And we felt like what it all came down to were the human connections that we were going to create between all of us that made up that complete story. We are storytellers, yes, but storytelling is also us. And just by being on this room or on this stage or in these seats, you are a unique part of that story, and the story is you. And that story certainly would not be the same without you. Each one of you is a beautiful thread in that tapestry. And if you think about that tapestry, you think about how each thread has a different hue, how each thread catches the light a little bit differently. Each one plays a part in holding the entire thing together. Now think about what happens when one of those threads is removed, and another, and pretty quickly that grand tapestry becomes a little less vibrant, a little less robust, and at a certain point it starts to look like nothing at all. So when we stop including members of us who are different than us in our stories become at best pretty sad, and at worst, tragedies. I'm proud to introduce this next panel of storytellers who themselves have worked with and within some of the most far-reaching and most impactful stories ever told. Stories that some might say were the greatest. So please welcome to the stage with me, Jeff Thatcher, Yael Koifman, Jonathan Alger, and Andrew Bagley.
Thank you. So, we're here to talk about the greatest story ever told. And I appreciate that at a conference about diversity, at a conference about inclusion, that saying that our story is the greatest is perhaps a little arrogant. There's some hubris to that. But I don't want you to worry. The reason we picked this title was because it's based upon a 1965 film of the same name. And this film brought together a diverse group of people to tell the greatest story ever told. First, we had as Jesus, an atheist, Max von Sydow. As Martha, we had a Jewish actress, Ina Balin. And finally, as Pontius Pilate, we had the great Telly Savalas, a Greek Orthodox, who, by the way, shaved his head for the very first time for this role. Now, please understand that I put these actors in here for the masters that were here yesterday, so they know who these actors are. And if you don't, you can Google them. But what was it? What was it that brought together this diverse group of people to create the greatest story ever told? What was their motivation? Why did they come together? They came together to make money. And if you want to go to your Apple phone, you can go to the Apple Store and you can purchase the greatest story ever told. Or you can watch it for free on Amazon Prime. So Jeff Bezos is still making money from this film. Now, there is no doubt that there are faith-based attractions all over the world that are making money and losing money. You can find these experiences in Branson, Missouri. You can find them in Pigeon Forge. You can find them in Abu Dhabi. You can find them almost anywhere in the world. In fact, I'm sure that many of you have been here to the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. Interesting fact, and I know Yael Kaufman, who's coming out a little later to talk about numbers. She's going to explore these in a little more detail. But this attraction is the #1 tourist attraction in the UAE. It draws more tourists than Ferrari World, Warner Brothers World, and the Louvre combined. But it's not just about mosques. We have Jonathan Alger, an architect, who will be coming out in a minute as well. And he's worked on St. Patrick's Cathedral and has worked on the Museum of the Bible. And we're excited to hear his insights. And finally, we have Andrew Bagley, who runs an advertising agency in Utah, whose largest client operates the #1 tourist attraction in Utah. And it's not Park City. So, please welcome to the stage our presenters for you today. We have Yael Kaufman, founding principal and partner at LDP. We have Jonathan Alger, an architect and designer from C&G Partners. And we have Andrew Bagley, president of Bondcom. Now, we have a confession to make. We are all just a bit nervous to share this story with you today. We're a bit nervous to talk about faith because we know that talking about faith can make some people uncomfortable. And in fact, we approach this subject with a little fear and trepidation. And it's based on personal experience. Several years ago, actually more than several years ago, I was asked to help the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in their effort to increase their attendance. This is a marquee attraction on the riverfront in Cincinnati, $110 million to build. It is an amazing experience. But as you can see from the local African-American newspaper, the Cincinnati Herald, planners said in 1997 that the Freedom Center would attract 1 million visitors a year. But in 2002, estimates were scaled back to 260,000 a year. In 2005, the center's full year of the center of operation was 205, and the attendance has been steadily declining ever since. The challenge they were having, and the brief they gave us, was how do you convince a suburban soccer mob who lives in Mason, Ohio, or other suburbs surrounding the city, to drive downtown instead of driving to Kings Island and go to a museum about slavery? the market research and focus groups that they did found that most people were saying this: I don't want to pay to feel guilty. So as we showed up for our first meeting, it was before the museum was open, and there was an elderly African-American security guard who was working the desk there. And I noticed that he was reading the Bible. And for a moment, I thought, well, maybe the one thing that this suburban soccer mom has in common with this African-American gentleman from downtown Cincinnati is that they both share the same faith. And this spark of an idea was confirmed as we started walking through the Freedom Center. The escaping slaves from the South referred to the Ohio River as the River Jordan, a nod to the symbol of freedom for Jews. A large graphic as you enter the museum from Sojourner Truth, a great abolitionist who escaped slavery herself, said this: I have borne 5 children and seen most all sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. Later, you see examples of both the hypocrisy of using faith to justify slavery, with pictures of lynchings in front of churches, as well as a beautiful immersive theater that tells the story of an abolitionist preacher who helped shuttle slaves across the Ohio River. My favorite experience in the entire Freedom Center is a gallery of slave ship names carved onto stone. What a powerful place to have a discussion with your children if you're a parent about hypocrisy. The Grace of God was one of those ships' names. So working with the public relations director at the Freedom Center, we came up with this idea of faith to freedom. We were very excited about it. We're like, you know what, let's really tell the story of how faith inspired so many abolitionists. Let's tell the story of how faith was used by others to justify slavery and use it to inspire people. And at the time, we were going to try to steal some of the thunder of the Creation Museum, who had just opened across the river and were drawing more than twice the numbers of the Freedom Center. How can we use some of their faith-based marketing efforts and steal their thunder and get these mothers to bring their families and bring their children to the Freedom Center? So we developed exhibit guides. We developed sermons to send out. We developed a whole marketing campaign. We called it Faith to Freedom. We were very excited about it. We went into the CMO and we pitched the idea. And the CMO got very, very angry. He thumped his hand onto the table and he said, "We are not a church and we never will be." And of course, we backed off and we said, no, you misunderstand. This is a business decision. We're not trying to convert anybody. We're not trying to make a statement about belief. We're simply trying to get more people to attend your museum by appealing to a faith-based audience. And he said, no. And again, we reasoned. We said, well, listen, CNN has a faith reporter, and it's not because they believe or because they're trying to share the message. It's because they're a business and they want to reach this audience. But we were unsuccessful. Our plans were ditched, and they went in another direction. Now, I'll be honest, I have no idea if our plan would have worked. It was never tried. But I do know that what they're doing now is not working. Attendance, some years they get more than others, but just across the river, less than 40 minutes away, you have the Ark Encounter getting close to 1 million people a year. The Creation Museum had to expand their parking lot to get more people into their experience. And to this day, the Freedom Center does not attract this audience in significant numbers. So, it is true that everyone here with us today has personal biases when it comes to faith. We all do, for good or bad. And like the Reverend John Rankin, who was profiled in that theater, we ask you to please give a candid ear to what we have to share with you today. I promise you that none of us are trying to convert you to anything, but keeping an open mind. And in fact, perhaps, we even share a few common beliefs. As I look around here and I see the nice gobo up on the wall, I do think that we share some common beliefs. Is there anyone here that believes in storytelling? Yeah? Do you believe in storytelling? Is there anyone here who believes in architects? Wait, who believes in architecture? Yes, yes. All right, electrosonic, let's hear it. Do you believe in technology? Yes. And if you combine these things, do you believe in experiences? Yes. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you somebody who believes in numbers. Yes! Let's hear it for Yale Courseman. Now, I've worked with Yale, and anyone who's worked with Yale knows that her bluntness is a whetstone of refinement.
So nicely said.
And with that, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a very nice way of saying that sometimes I may be a little bit rude with reality when you're talking to clients. A little bit of history, actually, just for anyone who doesn't know where this came from. Jeff called me about 3 months ago, and he said, so I want to do this thing about faith-based attractions. Do you want to talk to numbers? I'm like, sure. Yeah, that'll be easy, right? And I'm like, but why? He's like, well, because no one's talking about it. I'm like, well, that's the reason to do it. To be perfectly honest, no one's talking about it. But I am an economist. I look at the markets. I look at the financial feasibility of entertainment projects, and as, therefore, by definition, a little bit of a dork, which means you have to start digging into the data, see what's out there. And the more I found, you know, what exactly is a faith-based attraction? And there's so much information, we could spend an entire day talking about it, but I don't have a day. I'm not going to make you fall asleep. So I'm just going to do a couple snapshots of what we found. So the first thing is actually you notice that there are 3 different stages of religious attractions when you look at them around the world. The first one is the pure place of worship. They still exist. The most famous one probably being the Great Mosque of Mecca, where they have at least 10 million people visiting a year during the Hajj. Then what we have is a transition of what used to be purely faith-based attractions. They used to be places of worship. But what's happened, and primarily in Europe more than anywhere else, is that you have congregation levels are decreasing. Less and less people are actually focusing on religion. So they've become tourist attractions. And when we look at those, we're talking about things such as St. Paul's Cathedral, the Vatican, Sacré-Cœur until it burnt down. But these are turning into real attractions for tourists. Another one that I'm going to talk about as well is the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque. And then finally, we have what's emerged recently is what we're calling the commercial, they're standalone faith-based attractions. They are built specifically to get a message across. And those you've mentioned as well, things like the Ark, the Holy Land Experience in Orlando. If you've ever had the chance to visit it, it's a unique experience. There's one more, actually, which is kind of fallen off the edge, like the dinosaurs. It's the extinct religion attraction, which we forget about. They're extinct. They don't exist anymore. But the Acropolis in Greece actually was a collection of temples and places of worship. The Mayan and the Aztec temples in Central America. There are tons of things out there which actually owe their roots back to religion, which is what started it. So it's something to just keep in mind, open mind. And as I said before, I'm a numbers person, that's what we look at. So couple of quick things here, and again, this is going to be a snapshot of all the things we found, but we started off looking at European ones. Why? Because it's probably one of the most, in terms of markets, very developed in terms of the attractions industry, but also very developed in terms of tourism and history. And one of the key things we looked at was St. Paul's. And what's interesting when you look at St. Paul's visitor mix, and they do charge admission, is over 50% of the visitors that come there are pure paying tourists. They're not there for worship. Those are broken out separately. They're there because they've heard the history, they want to see the art, they want to go through the crypt and the whole exhibition area, and it is on the list of must-see attractions in London. Sorry, I realized I was behind a slide. But you can see, actually, if you take a look, you know, the paying ones, that's all the way down there at the bottom. We have the schools, and then on the top, we have the public worship and the non-paying guests. When you look at it in the context of the market, and this is something, if you've dealt with feasibility consultants, I'm sorry, you can hear it again, the market, it comes down to who can actually potentially come visit. And that's a blend of the domestic and international tourists as well as residents. And when we look at it over time in regards to London, we see, what do we see? Well, we see basically the market's more or less the same, and the attendance levels are more or less the same, because it's saturated now. It has its place. It's an established tourist attraction in a major metropolitan area. There is a blip in 2013, and I'm wondering if anybody knows why there was an increase in visitation to St. Paul's in 2013. Does anybody remember what was there in 2012? Exactly. So what actually happened with the Olympics is actually you had less people coming to London for the typical traditional tourist attractions. They were afraid of the brouhaha, of the traffic issues, etc. And they said, no, we'll put it off for a year. So then, of course, we had pent-up demand in 2013, which is why it increased. Paris as well, as you can see, we had Sacré-Cœur and we have the Notre Dame of Paris. We're talking about millions of visitors here. Over 10 million people were visiting both of these individual attractions during the year. And a good portion of them, again, tourists, more than 50%. Not driven by religion, but driven by the history and the art of the actual facility. I'm going a little quicker now because of the rest of the time. One more experience I want to talk about as well in terms of Europe is actually the Sistine Chapel show. This is an immersive show which has been done to sort of highlight the beauty and the history of the Sistine Chapel. It brings the paintings and the life basically the paintings and the life of Michelangelo to life for tourists. This is a show which is time tickets. It gets 90% of its visitors from tourists. And again, these are not faith-driven. They're coming here because of the history and the way it's been showcased. What's interesting about these guys is they're shutting down now. They've done over 300,000 people since they opened it. They're going on tour. And the idea is that they're going to go on tour and they're going to bring the Sistine Chapel to people who cannot afford to go to Rome and give them that experience. The next location is Mexico City, for example. Now, here's the bit that I find interesting. Again, remembering what I said about religion sort of going downhill in Europe and all that kind of stuff. What are they doing? Well, we have a mini golf course up there. You know, we're getting the markets in that aren't coming. So they actually did a historically themed mini golf course in Rochester Cathedral, and it nearly doubled their attendance. And they were getting the younger kids, and they were getting the markets that weren't going. Then, of course, we have our lovely Richard III, who was found dead under a parking lot, if you remember that. All right, what did that do? Attendance grew by over 400% because people wanted to see a dead body. You know, let's be honest. You know, this is how people think a lot of times. Oh, it's new, it's novel. But then also the other thing we can learn from these guys, which is what a lot of attractions and museums are doing now, is St. Paul's has limited capacity for the main services that it does on Christmas and during Easter. So what have they done? They've expanded out into the plaza. They've done major events with big screens, special event programming. They've done that as well to increase their attendance over time. I'm going to talk very quickly now about the Asian ones. So this is oops, I keep forgetting I'm behind. Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi. It is the leading attraction, not just in Abu Dhabi, but in the UAE in terms of for tourists. As you can see, actual regular visitors are more than 50%. It helps it's free, to be honest, in terms of why people go there. It's not that old. It doesn't have history. But what it does have is an interesting story behind it in terms of why it was built and how they tried to source materials and talents and artists from around the world to build what they wanted to be this destination mosque. Also, I'd like to talk about the Golden Temple in India. Okay. Context, 36 million visitors a year. Think about that. When you're thinking about the theme parks and everything else, 36 million. And these guys are actually faith-based. Most of them are domestic. You don't have international tourists going there that much. But at the end of the day, this is a huge facility and a huge market. A couple more little snapshots on the Indian temples. The key thing here is if you look up on the corner there on the chart, you can see that sort of light green thing. That's tourists. Everybody else is domestic, and they're going there to all these temples as pilgrimages, as things that they do because they live there. So it's showing the opportunity as time goes forward to make these more of tourist destinations. Right, so does anybody recognize this? Has anybody been to Puy du Fou? Raise your hand if you have. I can see some up there as well. So Puy du Fou has got numerous awards as one of the best sort of show theme parks in the world. And it's really well done. But I don't know how many people that have visited actually speak French. Anyone? Yeah. If you actually listen to the story and the dialogue, this is a very subtly themed, continuous Christianity and nationalism message. But they see it as a theme park. But it's actually rooted in the history of the original founder, which was nationalistic and Christian. So finally, I just want to touch on some of the performance things that we've done. And we've looked at two different types of faith-based attractions. One is what we call the worship attractions, the ones that started because they were a place of worship in some way, shape, or form. And then some of them, as we said, have branched out and really commercialized the experience. And then we have the standalone attractions at the bottom in red. Those are the ones that are specifically built. Now look at the difference in attendance, with the exception of Puy du Fou down at the bottom, because most people don't realize it's actually religious. The difference in attendance is why? It's because they're leveraging the two different markets they have available. They have the religiously based people that are driven there to see whatever the story is they want to see. And then they're getting the regular tourists that just want to hear the history. It could be architecture, it could be art, it could be whatever it is that they find intriguing. For a lot of people in St. Paul's and Westminster Abbey, it's because, Princess Diana got married there. Yes, that actually still has value after all these years. And what's interesting as well is when you look at the penetration factor, and this is the capture of the available markets that these have, it's actually stronger with the worship-based attractions. Why? Because again, they're leveraging all those markets. This little chart here is actually showing you the ratio between attendance and market size, and where they fall. And as you can see, there is a general trend there, clearly. As your market grows, your attendance grows as well. There are outliers. A couple just to mention, St. Paul's Cathedral and the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. You'll see them down there. There we go. There they are. Really falling down. And these are not, they're still getting in the millions in terms of attendance. But why are they so low? Because they are in very competitive markets. You go to Washington, D.C., you have all of the Smithsonian museums to compete with you as well. There are tons of things to do if you're in D.C. You're going to London, not only do you have the heritage things, such as the Tower of London, but you also have all the Merlin attractions, and they're really good at getting you in there and having you do more than one thing. So there is a competitive environment. Holy Land Experience as well. Why? It's in Orlando. One of the most competitive commercial attractions markets in the world. But I finally, just looking again at the scale of this all, you can see the levels of attendance, over 30 million, down to our little guys here and under 1 million. This is a huge, huge industry when you're looking at numbers of visitors. And it definitely has ability to be exploited further, let's put it that way. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about pricing. And this is, we looked at, as I said, a lot of these things are free. But in this specific situation, we looked at pricing amongst both the worship-based and the more commercial attractions. And we look at something called entertainment value, which Linda mentioned briefly yesterday, but that's the actual cost per hour of entertainment at the attraction. So it's a way to easily measure a 1 hour versus a 3 hour length of stay. And what you see, which is quite interesting, is that although the price amongst the commercial standalone faith-based attractions is significantly higher on average, when you look at the entertainment value, the places of worship are actually getting more value per hour from their ticketing than the ones that were bespoke. And again, that's because they can leverage multiple stories. Finally, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit running over, just some key takeaways regarding these faith-based attractions. When you look at them between the bespoke, like the Ark or the Creation Museum, versus the ones that have historically been there, there's no real difference in pricing that much. Special events and promotions throughout the year are key to bringing in those market demographics that you haven't actually been able to achieve before. Tourists are fantastic, but I think, I mean, you can read most of these. The key thing is that all aspects of the facility need to be celebrated. So part of it is, yes, the faith and the history behind that, but part of it is also, what is the role of this place in society? What's its role in history? What are the unique things that might appeal to different target markets to basically maximize potential? And with that, I'd like to say thank you and welcome Jonathan Alger up to the wall and talk away.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm from New York, but I'm okay. So we started working on this project, the Museum of the Bible, in Washington, D.C. And here we go. It saw 1 million visitors in its first year. I'll tell you a little bit about it. If you haven't gone, has anyone gone? Any? Oh, that's good. Awesome. So if you haven't gone, you should go. It's definitely a pretty awesome place. It's 8 stories tall, 430,000 square feet. That means it's bigger than the African American Museum. It's 3 times bigger than the Spy Museum. Those are the last 3 big museums to open in Washington, D.C. So it's definitely worth your ticket price because it's free. And you can pay if you want to. Guess how many people will pay if they want to. But anyway, it really is one of the most, if not the most, technologically advanced museums that you're going to find. And for that reason, I really encourage everyone to go check it out. For a lot of reasons, I encourage everyone to go check it out. It has a number of different floors that are dedicated to different ways of telling the story of the Bible. One of the floors has to do with the narrative in the Bible, and that was done by our good friends at BRC. Anyone? BRC? Well, I love you. There's another floor that is about the Bible itself as a book, historic books that are collected. The floor that we did 30,000 square feet. Actually, it also contains a ride, a flyboard ride done by Dymo Rides, which is great. You fly over Washington, D.C. and learn the biblical secrets of Washington, D.C. But the floor that we did is about the impact of the Bible. And that's the impact of the Bible as a thing on fashion, on architecture, on literature, and on art. When you think about it, like, has the Bible impacted art? Oh, yeah, right, an awful lot, right? So that was the kind of story that we told. We had to invent it. We had to do all the research ourselves, and we were very proud of what we were able to accomplish there. And I'll talk a little bit about this movie. Don't worry, it's short. And this is just to give you a taste of what it's like to be inside one of these faith-based attractions. One of our mandates was to make sure that the audience could be anyone. It could be someone of faith, someone of a different faith, someone of no faith. The subject is the Bible. And so the Bible has its Old Testament and it has its New Testament. Some of the books in the Old Testament are known in Judaism as the Torah, the Tanakh. Much of our story is based in that part of the narrative. And of course, we have the New Testament. It tells the story with one of the main protagonists, of course, is Jesus. But our entire story is not really about the Bible. Our entire story is about the evidence of the Bible and everything else. Balenciaga and Dolce & Gabbana recently having whole runway shows dedicated to biblical Byzantine mosaic interpretations. The idea that the founding fathers of the United States used the Bible basically as sort of a common language to debate the founding documents of what would eventually become this country. The fact that the driving force behind the innovation of the Gutenberg press, the printing press, was in order to mass produce Bibles. Like I said, it's one of the most technologically advanced museums you're going to find. There's a lot of interactivity, there's a lot of media. We produced 4 different pieces of large-scale and interactive media for one of the floors. We only did one of them. There are 3 permanent ones, 8 floors, 430,000 square feet. This project also includes a lot of fun stuff. The Bible has been the subject matter of countless films, and as Yael was saying, countless other attractions. The Bible has also been the foundation of the way we think about criminal punishment. There's the eye for an eye people. That's a quote from the Bible. There's the restorative justice people. There's both sides in the Bible. People ask me on this project, were you told by your client to only put in the good story? And no, we were not. In fact, we told the story about how abolition was both promoted and contested by people who were quoting from the Bible. In the end, it's a book. You can use it, you can misuse it. Quotes that we use in our everyday language that come from the Bible. So the idea was basically for anyone who walks in to just understand, as Richard Dawkins, the probably most notable literary atheist out there, would say, if you don't know the Bible, you probably aren't reading Shakespeare very well, because of all of the metaphorical and symbolic things that are in our everyday lives that we don't understand if we don't understand the book. I failed out of Sunday school. They kicked me out, actually. I asked too many questions. The woman was just like, I can't, Mr. and Mrs. Alger, I just can't, I can't. I can't. And so I fell from the pulpit of that. I fell from the pulpit of architecture. And now I'm doing exhibit design. I know my life, I just don't know. But this is a great project to work on. And we're absolutely rabidly passionate about it. We had some wonderful experiences doing this project. The very first meeting that we had was a meeting with, happened to be, luck of the draw, a meeting with a group of Mennonites. And I come from the People's Republic of Brooklyn, and so does all of my, amen, Brooklyn, okay. So does all of my staff, and so this group of Mennonites showed up. They're all guys with weird beards, funny hats, flannel. They had their own hatchets. And my whole staff came in. There were a bunch of weird guys with beards, funny hats, flannel. They had their own hatchets. And I was like, actually, I think this project's going to be fine. And at the end, they're like, do you know Gary? Oh, I know Gary. That's terrific. Exchanging business cards. We also designed the identity. So, you know, on a personal basis and also a professional basis, when we took the call, they said, would you like to be involved with this Museum of the Bible project? We knew a little bit about it. We knew a little bit about the funders. And my first reaction was like, no, I don't know. And then I thought, you know, what America needs at this point is more people who would say yes to an invitation like that. And so my whole group of axe-wielding, flannel-wearing hipster yayas spent 4 years deeply embedded with a whole group of people coming from every stripe you can imagine. Not every, but many. And many of whom were from the South, from the religious right, whatever, and we found so much that we had in common. And if I can leave you with one thought from my perspective, if you ever get an invitation like that, say yes, because you'll find that that person across the table from you really has much more in common with you than they have things that are different from you.
Andrew Bagley, president of Bondcom, and I moved to Salt Lake about 2 years ago and have the privilege of working with a talented group of people, cause-driven marketers that we've attracted from top agencies around the country. And in Salt Lake, we do struggle a bit with diversity. It is something I've been focusing on the last couple of years. So you do see my employees here, not as much diversity as I'd like, but it's something we're working on. When I started, it was 12%. Women. Now we're over 30% of our staff is women, and we're growing a Hispanic marketing team as well. When we talk about cause-based marketing, so we just work on, we do some travel and tourism, but cause-driven marketing, our clients are focused on suicide prevention, the opidemic, clean air, those types of projects are the things that we work on, but we also work with religious organizations and those types of causes. And if you look at any of those causes, they have an agenda. You know, whether it's clean air or the opidemic, there's an agenda there. And as an agency, you have to look at the agenda of your client, and then you try to make that as inclusive as possible. So if you've been to one of the blessings of living in Salt Lake is we're just a few hours from the beautiful Red Rocks of Zion. If you've been to Zion, if not, it should be on your bucket list. And we're also, our office overlooks Temple Square. That's the headquarters of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's got acres of temples and worship buildings. historic homes, concerts. So you're going to Utah, and you decide, what are you going to do? Do you go to Zion's, or do you go to a religious institution? And if you choose Zion's, you're in good company. We've worked to promote both of these locations. 4.5 million people go to Zion's every year. But you might be surprised that the #1 attraction is actual Temple Square, with about 6 million people each year going to Temple Square. So as we look more broadly, you've got almost 6 billion people in the world in some way, shape, or form associated to religion. And I know in polite company, this is a topic we tend to avoid because we focus on the differences. But again, as my co-presenters has talked about, there's all these things we have in common. And if you're ignoring this audience and excluding them altogether, and instead of looking at those things we have in common, there's a big market that you're missing. Traditionally, in marketing, it's been approached with this sort of head, heart, hand. If I can get you to change the way you think, then you might feel something, and then you might start to act differently. But what we employ, as what we've learned from experienced designers, is the opposite is true. That the fastest way to get people to change their behaviors is to get them to do something so that they can feel, and then they change their mind. So what happens with all of us, there's this cognitive dissonance. When our beliefs and actions aren't in alignment, it creates cognitive dissonance. We like those things to be in alignment. So if you can, and it's not tricking people, but as experienced people, you get people to experience something that maybe they hadn't planned on or thought of. They experience something, and then they have to reconcile, who am I? And by experiencing it, they have to question, am I the kind of person that does this? Well, I'm doing it. So I must be the kind of person that finds this sort of thing interesting or important. And all of a sudden, you start to feel something different, and you change beliefs. So again, there's an agenda in any cause-driven marketing. One of the projects that we're working on right now, it's in early stages, it's called Spark. And with our research with Gen Z populations, religion is declining. They've got the religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, associated with no religion. And again, the agenda behind the sponsoring organization, it's non-denominational, but they realize certainly religion has caused a lot of harm in the world, but it's also created a lot of good in terms of community. And if you've heard of the rise of the epidemic of loneliness, the rise of loneliness, that's one of the downfalls that we're seeing as people are less inclined to participate in a religious organization. So the goal of this is to design these pop-up museums to get Gen Z to come in and start to explore, is there a God? What might that look like to have a relationship with God? And then put them on a journey, but not tell them which path to go. Say, here's different places you can go explore that and see if that brings benefit into your life. So that's a project we're working on. Another one that we work on for the Church of Jesus Christ, we've launched this campaign called Light the World, and the challenge we took was, how might we shift Christmas from a season of getting to a season of giving? So we developed the Light the World brand and partnered with Latter-day Saint Charities to develop an experiential giving opportunity. I'm going to show you this quick video, and then I'll explain it a little bit more. So this line here is not the line to get the new iPhone outside the Apple Store. This is people waiting for over 2 hours to line up behind these giving machines to go and donate money. So why would somebody do that? Anybody can go online to any one of these organizations and in less than 5 minutes swipe their credit card. But what we found was parents bringing their grandkids, kids bringing their parents, youth groups coming together to have this experiential, tactile moment of giving. And again, I failed to mention this with the Spark example, but in making this inclusive, you have to find what is that common thread? Especially as you're dealing with religious sponsored things, what is that common thread that brings people together? With Spark, so we're playing into things like stewardship for the environment, or that we're all brothers and sisters. And how can we see each other that way? So finding that common thread that audience cares about, they may not care about religion, but what is that common thread? And with this, certainly people from all walks of life and all religions came together to donate. So it was partnerships with in New York, it was partnership with the Catholic Charities, but also with the Utah Food Bank and with CARE International, so partnering with other organizations to do that. So last year we raised $2.3 million for global and local charities. And this year, we had 5 locations. This year, we're going to expand to about 10 locations globally, and we're excited about that. So just in concluding thoughts, as you think about inclusivity and think about religion as part of that, there's 5.8 billion people tied to a religion. And as you design things, you need to design them with inclusivity in mind, meaning this group, but also how can we find things that bring this group together instead of point out their differences? The other is it has to be experiential. The Gen Z, the younger audience, they're less inclined towards traditional religion. So how do we design experiences that get people excited about the mystical, the things that are out there that are unexplainable? How do you do that in an experiential way? And then lastly, how do we do it in an inclusive way? So we're thinking about what are those common threads that everybody cares about so that we can design experiences that bring people together instead of separate people. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think someone's supposed to bring me questions, if there are questions. Here we go. Thank you very much. All right. Well, here's a good question. I think it's for Jonathan because he worked on the Museum of the Bible. At what point do we cross the line from a religious or faith-based attraction to just making faith or religion a show?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. At about 38.5% along into the project. Yeah, that's a very philosophical question, right? I mean, for 39.5. When we were working on our project at the Museum of the Bible, we just had to be very aware that we had 2 audiences. I mean, and for one of the audiences, it is sort of a show in a way, because if you come into that space and you're not inclined to be a person of faith, you're a hardcore skeptic, there's still a lot for you to take away. It's really designed for you. I mean, absolutely. At the same time, we had to cater to 2 groups who were sort of restoring their faith or rebooting their faith, or they need no rebooting, they were just going to be doing it, and it was a powerful thing for them. So in a way, we were planning for all audience types, like what you do in a theme park. You have to plan for a wide, sort of the gamut. And so I'll answer the question this way, we actually planned it to both be a faith-based attraction and also for those who are not of faith, a show, because you have to respect your audience, whoever they are.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, you said that you decided to say yes when the Museum of Bible came calling. And so, Andrew, you just sent out a bid for this Spark. And I'm sure there's people here in the audience that might go, well, geez, how do I get involved in that? But what was the reaction you got when you sent out and reached out to design firms and media firms to help you with Spark?
That's the first conversation that we have is this a project that you would be willing to work on and come with an open mind, knowing that, similar to your experience with Museum of the Bible, the sponsors want it to be as inclusive as possible, but there is an agenda. There's an agenda that says the Bible is an important book, and I want people leaving believing that. And in Spark, the agenda is the belief that we're better off when people have this connection to deity without having a direct agenda to a specific organization. So certainly interviewed lots of firms, and we get told no quite a bit. So there are several people that just aren't comfortable working on religious things because they feel it's too counter to their personal beliefs, or so lots of rejection.
So Yale, if Andrew comes calling and wants you to work on a feasibility study for Temple Square, what would you say?
I say sure.
Why?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, let's put this in context. There's clearly within this room a whole different level of belief or lack of belief. I'm a lack of belief person, but that's good. Because in what I do, which is look at the numbers and take a close analytical approach of what could happen, what won't work, that's actually the best thing to do, is you're completely removed from the situation. You don't get wrapped into the story. You don't get wrapped into the mission. You're just saying, what would actually work? I find it challenging and interesting.
Thank you. I have one more question here on the card, a handwritten note from backstage. It says, no time for more questions.
Aww.
So, in closing, let me jump to one last slide here. So, we wanted to leave you today with a little bit of feeling and emotion and a little bit of story. So we're going to bring Alexandria Henderson back on stage to sing This Little Light of Mine, a Negro spiritual written in the 1920s and adopted over time to the civil rights movement. And this song was the first song played on the David Letterman, the Late Show with David Letterman, on September 17th, 2001, after 9/11, by the Harlem Boys Choir. And it's a great example of how a gospel song, a song about faith, can embed itself in culture, in meaning, and in story. And we're very excited to bring Alexandria back to sing this song for you. So thank you very much.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Can y'all sing that with me? Say, this little light of mine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Have a great lunch, everyone.